Now for today's Power Player segment, time is running out for senators to reach a deal on President Trump's tax plan. The president wants the big, beautiful bill on his desk before July 4th. As the deadline closes in, it's still not clear to markets what the bill's economic impact will be. The White House Council of Economic Advisors estimates growth from the new tax plan could slash up to $2.3 trillion from the deficit, but the Congressional Budget Office found the mega bill would add $2.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. Joining me now to explain that disparity is Stephen Miran, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Stephen, good to see you here. Let's start there. What do you attribute that huge disparity between your projections and the CBO's?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. Look, the issues with the Congressional Budget Office's score is that they're not designed to be a holistic view of the deficit. They're designed to play into very specific rules for passing legislation through what's called the reconciliation process in Congress, that you only need a simple majority to pass rules instead of the filibuster-proof supermajority of 60 votes, right? That's a really sort of highly specialized and Byzantine process, and it's just a mistake to extrapolate from the CBO score to think that you're understanding what's going to happen to the deficit overall. There's a number of things that are not included in that score that will reduce the deficit. Let me go through some of them for you. First, better economic growth. The One Big Beautiful Bill contains numerous tax incentives for better economic growth. There's full expensing on investment, full expensing on equipment investment, on new factories, on R&D. There's things like no taxes on tips and overtime and Social Security. And these are targeted at segments of the population that are very responsive to incentives to work more. And these will get economic growth booming, right? In addition to keeping tax rates low and preserving the president's historic 2017 tax cuts. This economic growth creates more revenue because if there's more income, then there's more taxes that get paid into the government, and that brings the deficit down. But there's lots of other stuff that the CBO doesn't include also, things like tariff revenue, things like cuts from discretionary spending administratively, things like lower interest burdens because we're borrowing less because of these other things. And all of these combine to materially bring down deficits. We calculate that when you add all these things up, better economic growth leading to higher revenues, tariff revenue pouring in, less discretionary spending because of administrative cuts to waste, fraud, and abuse, and lower interest expenses, we calculate that when you add all these things up together, you get about $8.5 to $11 trillion of deficit reduction over the 10-year budget window.
Stephen, let me push back, because within this report, I believe you're projecting 4.9% economic growth. However, the tax rates are going to likely stay the same in this plan versus 2017. What do you say to those that are saying you're being too optimistic on the output potential of the economy?
Yeah, so that's actually not the growth projection. So that number, 4.6 to 4.9% GDP growth over a 4-year period relative to letting the tax cuts expire, mean that GDP will be about almost 5% higher at the end of 4 years than before. Now that works out to a point to a point and a quarter a year, right, of better GDP growth from this, which brings GDP growth into the high 2s range. As a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill and the other policies we've got going on. So it's not a correct reading of the paper to think that we're claiming there's going to be 5% GDP growth. Okay,
fair enough. Now, you mentioned tariffs, and I want to dig into that a little bit, because you have tariff revenue reducing the deficit by close to $3 trillion. Now, in the report, those estimates were as of a June 7th memo from the Office of Management and Budget. Now, with these tariff negotiations still going on, should investors still expect tariffs are a key plank of the U.S. economy over the next decade?
Yeah, so the Congressional Budget Office finally did something on tariffs where they said that, and it's not included in the score for the bill because tariffs aren't part of the bill, right? But the CBO finally did something on tariffs, and they found that tariffs would bring in about $2.8 trillion over a 10-year window. Plus, if you reduce interest expenses on top of that, it comes to about $3 trillion, right? Which more than pays for their static score of the bill. Now, those numbers are very similar to our internal estimates. Our internal estimates are maybe a hair higher than that, but not materially enough that it's worth splitting hairs over. You do make the point that negotiations are well underway and that countries are lining up to make concessions to the president so that he can secure trade deals, and that is very true. Now, while I do expect that many deals many frameworks will be announced in the next couple of weeks, running up to the July 9th deadline, and that we are in the process of making very good deals, I don't know that I think the tariff rates are going to go in aggregate materially below where they are now. And so, while I can imagine a few countries maybe making such aggressive concessions they convince the president president to lower tariffs below 10%. I don't see that being necessarily the case across all countries. And I'm sure there are other countries that are just going to be stubborn and decide no, and then they'll have the Liberation Day tariff snap back up on them. So some tariff rates may go down a little bit, it's possible, but other tariff rates will go up a bit. And so in aggregate, I don't know that the overall level will change that much. Moreover, if tariff rates are coming down, it's because other countries are making concessions to open their markets to American products in order to achieve those lower tariff rates. Right? The president is using tariffs to negotiate reductions in non-tariff barriers so that American goods can enter foreign markets and that we have reciprocal and fair trade. If American goods are entering foreign markets, then we're selling more. There's more income. There's more corporate income, there's more personal income, and these both get taxed in the same way all other corporate and personal income do get taxed. And so revenue still goes up either way. You just substitute tariff revenue into normal tax revenue. Sure. But in either case, money pours into the federal government.
Stephen, you're making some good points here. Let me just follow up here with this one. Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said earlier this month it was, quote, highly likely that the president will push back the July 9th tariff date. Is that still the case?
So my expectation, and to be clear, I'm not a trade negotiator. I'm not in the nuts and bolts and the weeds of all these negotiations. But my expectation would be that for countries that are negotiating in good faith and making progress, that rolling back the deadline makes sense. I mean, you don't blow up a deal that's in process and making really good, good faith, sincere, authentic progress by dropping a tariff bomb in it. You do that when you're at an impasse and you're not making any progress. And the president has shown successfully time and again that that's how things work. So when talks with the EU weren't going anywhere, the president threatened 50% tariffs. That immediately resolved the impasse, and then talks resumed and started making really good progress. And the president said, okay, no 50% tariffs, we'll stay at 10% because we think we're making progress towards a deal. And that was very, very encouraging. And so my expectation would be that if talks are making authentic, sincere, good faith progress and that they're really moving forward, then I don't see why rates would snap back higher aggressively. If they're not, then I could imagine they do snap back higher aggressively.